Okay, shall I stay here?
Good evening, everyone. If you'd please come and take a seat. I'm so. What? I'm going to use this. There's a canthus leaf. Nice flower. They are nice flowers. It's true. It's nice. Good evening. Come find a seat. And if we could ask, Jeff, Eric, if you could ask any of the board members and volunteers outside, it'd be nice if they came in and joined us for prayers. Thanks. Well, good evening, everyone. Let's acknowledge what's the first thing that's obvious. This is the first time we've been back in this room for prayer in a year and 2 months. And I think it's quite appropriate that we've come together to honor Malkah and her wisdom and her love. This is exactly what she and Harold would have wanted, for us to be back together as a community to share moments of tenderness and moments of learning and moments of closeness. So thank you for coming tonight. And to everyone who's watching on Facebook and YouTube, the whole world of virtual reality, we welcome you as well. Tonight, we welcome the Schulweis family and thank them for allowing us to share with them not just the lives of Rabbi and Malkah, but the memory and the wisdom and the presence in our lives. We welcome all of you who are guests of the community and some very special friends who've come to share memories tonight with Malkah. Just as a reminder that during the course of the week, there'll be Minyan for the family on Zoom and on Facebook, I believe, right? And the links for that will be published, and everyone is invited to continue to sit with the family and to show them your love and your support. We have words to share, and we have memories, and most of all, we have prayer to share. So let's begin together. Cantors, please.
Ozi, v'zimratia, v'yehili, Yeshua. 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 Nimratio Vayiri Rishua.
Okay. Please join me. There's an Oseh Shalom we haven't done for a while. Oseh Shalom, Shalom b'meromav. Hu yaseh shalom, that much again. Oseh shalom, shalom b'meromav. Hu yaseh shalom, hu yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu. Ve'yarkol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Ve'yarkol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh shalom b'meromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Shalom, shalom, shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael.
Good evening, everyone. I ask you to please rise with me if you can as we begin our prayers together. If you have a blue siddur in front of you, please open it up. For those of you at home, you can find a copy of the siddur at our website, vbs.org, at the Valley Beshalom homepage, where all of your COVID documents and prayers and learnings are all found there. Page 281, we rise together, the call to worship, the words of Baruch Hu.
V'horachum yichaper avon v'lo yashchit v'hirbal yashiv apo v'lo yahir kol chamato Adonai Hoshia melech yaneinu v'yom koreinu Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vahen. Baruch Atah Adonai.
You may be seated. We continue on the bottom of page 281.
Umavir yom umevi laila. Umavdil ben yom uvein laila. Adonai tzvaot shemo. Hail Chai v'kayom, Tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Hamari v'aravim.
Amen.
Nahavat olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha v'tah, Torah u'mitzvot, Chokim u'mishpatim, otanu limadeta. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu, v'shovenu u'v'komeinu, nasiach b'chukecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, u'v'mitzvotecha, le'olam va'ed. Ki hein chayenu, ve'orech yameinu, דרך ימינו, ובהם נגד יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
Amen. We turn to page 282 for the words of Shema Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך. ולימדתם אותם את בניך.
Turn to page 283.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אל אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה בני ישראל לחם ושירה בזמרה הבאה, ואומרו כולם ים בם בם בים בים בם יבם בם בים בם ים בם בם בים בים בם יבם בם בים בם איי 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 יבם בם בים בם איי 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 יבם בם בים בם מי כמוך באים אדוני מי כמוך נהדר בקודש נוראתי לו אוסף אלה מלכותך רבניך בוקי הים לפני משה זה עליינו ויאמרו אדוני מלך לעולם. ונאמר כי בא אדוני יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גואל ישראל.
Friends, join me on page 284 for the Hashkivenu prayer. We'll read it in English. It's a prayer for peace and for returning back to life. Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace, and awaken us again, our sovereign, to life. Spread over us your shelter of peace. Guide us with your good counsel. Save us because of your mercy. Shield us from enemies and pestilence, from starvation, sword, and sorrow. Remove the evil forces that surround us, and shelter us in the shadow of your wings. O God, who watches over us and delivers us, our gracious and merciful ruler, guard our coming and our going. Grant us life and peace now and always. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Praise for you, Adonai, eternal guardian of your people, Israel.
שמור את צאתנו בואנו לחיים, לחיים ולשלום, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, שומר עמו ישראל.
We rise together now on page 285 for Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ביולמד יברח חירותי ויבליך מלכותי וחייכון וביומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתבואר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה נחמתה דגם יהירן ביולמה וימרו.
Take a few moments now in private prayer and reflection. Traditional words of the Amidah are found on page 286. Use those or just use the words of your own heart. Take a few moments now. I invite all those who are continuing to pray to please do so. And as you conclude your prayers, you may be seated. We turn to page 294.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata melech Adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov einecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael v'chol leito v'chol shah b'shlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. יתקדם יקרש שמי רבה, בעלמא יברח ירצה וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובימיכון וחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה ומזמן קריב האמרו. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתבר ויתשומע ינשא אבירדור ויתעלה ויתעלל שמי דקודשו בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחת ונחמתה דמירם ימה והימרו תקבל צוד הון וברכון כל ישראל קודם אבן משמעיה והימרו יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו בין כל ישראל והימרו עושה שלום במרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו Amen.
We rise together on page 297 for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויסר ארץ. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Please be seated. If you knew Malkah Schulweis, you know that one of the words one could use to describe her is impeccable. I have never seen Malkah with a hair out of place. I've never seen her in sneakers. They'll never say that about me. You know that. It was always impeccable. The appearance was impeccable. The persona was impeccable. And the words, especially the words, were impeccable. The person who carefully chose her words for the power, for their urgency, for their passion, for their effect, who carefully chose her words so that they would gently enter your heart and then turn your life upside down, and who had words for everyone. When my father, who was having trouble with his father, needed some help, he called Malkah, and Dad had, for the first time in his life, a couple of sessions of therapy so that he could figure out how to talk to his 96-year-old father about life and death, and Malkah had words for him. And some years ago, when we were honoring Malkah that year, we had a little parade, and we took Malkah, and she sat with the youth group kids in the youth lounge. They had 50 teenagers and kids from junior high and high school age kids who sat around for 90 minutes without making a sound, listening to her share her wisdom. She always had words. And for each of us who were blessed with being close to her, there were always beautiful words. So tonight, in tribute, we're going to ask a few just to share a few words. And I know we could go around the room and everyone would have words. But we'll just do a few tonight. So let's begin with the family. Peter, I'd like to represent the family. Share a few words, please.
Well, my father-in-law, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, was very clear. Jewish practice shields mourners from social duties. Mourners traditionally sat behind a curtain, away from others' gaze. But in the U.S., we've come to expect a public presentation from them. As I think my father-in-law would have done, we can integrate these two approaches, preserving mourners' privacy and expressing their feelings to the community. For that reason, I, a mourner adjacent, am sharing some of their reflections. My beloved mother-in-law, Malkah, also knew how to balance Jewish and worldly approaches. A native Yiddish speaker, she became a college instructor in English literature. For decades, in her kosher kitchen, she cooked then exotic world cuisine. She loved Southeast Asian artifacts, even asking Harold if he was okay with the Indian idol she brought to decorate the living room. He was. She was a lifelong learner who understood that Judaism values a cultivated heart far above a clever mind. We saw her balance her family life with her role as Rebbitzin. The gift that she had of blending the best of the Judaic and the secular demonstrated the equilibrium that she created between treasuring Judaism's particular wisdom and welcoming universal experience. We will miss her particular wisdom and her openness to the whole world.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to welcome Sylvia Bernstein-Tregub, chair of the Schulweis Institute, longtime friend of the Rabbi and Malkah.
We are the fortunate ones. We who have a friend whom we admire and care for, whose judgment we trust and whose wise counsel we rely upon. We are the fortunate ones who are left to mourn because the memories, while very painful, are also very beautiful. Malkah was such a friend. She was my friend. And this was a friendship that grew through the years, and I do miss her. As our husbands became ill and very sadly passed away, we looked to each other for support and comfort, which was given lovingly and unfailingly. Malkah's home was warm and welcoming, tastefully appointed and open to host community, student, faculty, and synagogue events. She was a most gracious hostess who, as it was said, generously shared many favorite recipes and culinary tips, while also forging a new model for the role of a rabbi's wife. Rabbi Schulweis and their children, Eitan and Cindy, Seth and Esther, Alyssa and Peter, and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren were the joys of her life. And the love was reciprocal. For each day, she would receive a call from at least one of them. For her 90th birthday, she gathered the family together for a very beautiful, wonderful, meaningful reunion, and they came from near and very far. Professionally, Malkah was a respected therapist and a brilliant and sought-after educator, equally at home on a university campus, in a child's classroom, as Rabbi Feinstein mentioned, and on this Valley Beth Shalom Bima. And following morning Shabbat services, congregants lined up to speak, even briefly with her, and she remained gracious and generous with her time and counsel. One of my pre-COVID memories was of sitting with Malkah right over there during services each Shabbat morning. She always read the Shabbat Parsha during the week and came prepared to discuss a passage. She would follow the chanting line by line and then stop and pointing to a word and say excitedly, look at that. And of course I did. And I noticed that, look at what the sages said. They were truly wonderful. I never noticed that. Judaism is such a rich and vibrant tradition. And then she would explain what the phrase meant to her and how it was as relevant today as it was when it was first written. In addition to the many books she read, each morning she would also read the New York Times. And when we would talk, often on a daily basis, after we reassured each other of each family's well-being, she was suddenly asked if I read Tom Friedman's column in the op-ed section, and we would commiserate on the sorry state of world affairs. And even when her health was in decline, to the best of her ability, she kept current and engaged. During the COVID lockdown, it became harder to keep in touch, and sadly, we spoke less frequently. And each time we did, I feared it would be the last. And so I was delighted, as was she, when Seth arranged for us to speak just last week. And we savored each minute of our conversation, which sadly indeed proved to be our last. Several months ago, when she was too ill to watch, Malkah was very pleased when I shared with her that the synagogue had continued the tradition of annually marking the yahrzeit of Rabbi Schulweis. In past years, a noted Jewish leader or scholar was invited to teach. But due to COVID, we presented, which proved to be a highly acclaimed Zoom Havdalah service and program commemorating his 6th yahrzeit. It was accessible on the Schulweis Institute and VBS websites, as well as on Facebook and YouTube, and the program was viewed by over 1,400 people. We asked the viewers to be the teachers and share their Schulweis stories, and it was a very moving exercise that was followed by many requests to do this again, which is under consideration. Now, the reason I mention this is because, as many of you know, this technology was way beyond Malkah's comprehension. Just using a phone, was a challenge. But she was absolutely delighted and somewhat amazed that all of this worked, and that it enabled the Institute and Valley Beth Shalom to continue to make the rabbi's moral vision, his profound teachings, and his poetry available to scholars and students and to all of us. This was the Institute and Malkah's mission. But as for herself, Malkah was very modest, and I do recall how much convincing it took when Valley Beth Shalom chose to honor her a few years ago. I do admit that we were all a bit nervous because, after all, this was for Malkah, and we set the bar very high. In the preface to Rabbi Schulweis's keepsake book, From Prose to Poetry, that contains over 100 of his poems, he wrote, and I now excerpt, "These poems remind me that we are more than atoms and molecules. We are the light and the language of God." And on the occasion of their anniversary, he dedicated this poem entitled Yet for Malkah, that concluded with, "We have reached the harvest of many years. Children and children's children now dance and play before us. And in their eyes we see yet another part of ourselves. The best is yet to be." Malkah was blessed and remains a blessing to all of us who were touched by her presence. We were and remain the fortunate ones.
Thank you, Sil. Rabbi Uri Hersher bears many titles in the community, most recently distinguished founder and president of the Skirball Cultural Center. That entire wonderful, wonderful institution was the creation of his imagination and his energy and his passion. But tonight he bears a much more distinguished position. He's a dear friend of Malkah, and to my knowledge, Malkah's favorite dinner date. At least that's what she told me frequently. Please, Uri, come and share a few words. And while Uri's coming up, I want to acknowledge my dear colleague and teacher, Rabbi Eli Hersher, who's with us tonight too. Thanks, good. Good to see you, El. Please.
Thank you, Eddie. In Jewish tradition, in time of sorrow and loss, we have the expression, Zichrona Livracha. May she be remembered for blessing. For an exceptionally virtuous person, we say, Zichrona Tzadika Livracha. May the memory of the righteous be a blessing. Memory is a blessing, and righteousness is a blessing. But only very rarely can we say that not only memory, not only righteousness, but the person herself is a blessing. All of this is true of Malkah Schulweis. We honor her memory. We honor her goodness, because she herself was and will always be a blessing. My earliest memory of Malkah goes back to 1980, when I first arrived in Los Angeles. Malkah and Harold were among the very first to greet me and welcome me to their home. I was told, and it proved to be true, that I would always be welcomed. Every other Friday at 2 p.m., Harold and I would meet at their home for open-ended conversation. They were wonderful, wonderful occasions for me. Filled with Harold's rare passion and personal insights. Malkah's presence always hovered over these occasions. She would call Harold from her office to remind him that she had prepared a pre-Shabbat snack for Harold and me. Jell-O with fruit and cookies, to be served promptly at 3:30. All Harold would have to do is to boil water for the tea. She thought that this task could be entrusted to him. Not always. I remember the feeling upon experiencing this hospitality that Shabbat had already begun. Malkah would then call at 3:40 to let Harold know that she would be home in 20 minutes. This was part of her thoughtfulness, but it was also part of Malkah's way and Harold's ritual to let him know she was on her way home. At which time Harold would leave me and find a post-it note telling her upon arrival how happy he was that she was home. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Here were two such precious people, each devoted to the other, knowing who was most precious of all. It was a privilege to witness such love being lived in my presence. I marveled at the time, and I marvel still. In later years, our regular visits became 6 p.m. There were Thursday dinners at Fountainview. Harold, Malkah, Mina, and me, and I guess. After Harold died, Malkah still kept his chair at the table, still filled with his spirit. Mina and I began to learn more and more about Malkah. This was both a pleasure and privilege. If I could summon the right words to describe her, I would begin with her grace, her dignity, and her elegance. She brought a purity of attention to every conversation. She was truly present, always present. Her words were chosen just for you. There were no demands and no expectations. She never raised her voice. Yet when she spoke, the wisdom of her mind and warmth of her heart were deeply felt. We invited Malkah to the Skirball Cultural Center for a public program in which I had the honor of engaging her in conversation. She spoke unforgettably of her courting with Harold. She was 17 or 18 when they first met. She recalled that Harold had a hole in the sole of his shoe, which he filled with cardboard. This impressed her. She said that he was less concerned with material things and more passionate about his ideals. I recall this detail because it says so much about Malkah as it does about Harold. It is no wonder that they found such joy and fulfillment in their lifetime together. In her last years, Malkah spoke more and more about her grandmother, who after all these years dwelled still in a space of memory. It brought her both comfort and joy, she said, to channel her grandmother, to bring her memory to life. Then Malkah asked me once if I had such a person whose memory was a living inspiration. I said, yes, my Aunt Aviva, a remarkable pioneering kibbutznik. Yes, it was alive in my memory as she was still here. That's wonderful, Malkah said. Everyone needs such a person. When we lose our way, our joy, and our perspective, they bring us back to life and rekindle our spirit. So all of us, family, friends, Valley Beth Shalom congregation, and the entire Jewish community must go on now without Malkah Schulweis. But her life and spirit will live on in memory, in righteousness, and in blessing. And whatever I feel that I have lost my way, or my joy, or my perspective, I have someone unforgettable to guide me back to life and to rekindle my spirit. I will be channeling Malkah for the rest of my days on this earth. Malkah Schulweis, Zichronah Tzadika Livracha.
Thank you, Uri. Thank you so very much. If you go online when you go home and open up the Forward newspaper in English, you will read a beautiful tribute to Malkah written by Janice Kaminer-Resnick. Janice, of course, is I don't know what your title is anymore, founder, leader, president, co-founder with Rabbi Schulweis of the Jewish World Watch, among so many other wonderful accomplishments, and another dear friend of Malkah's. Please.
I'm really moved by what you said, Uri, and by you, Sylvia. Thank you so much. And by Peter, the family's words. Our beloved Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory always said that he never delivered a sermon, published an article, or embarked on an initiative without first getting the opinion, edits, or input of Malkah, his greatest fan, his greatest critic, and his greatest partner in all matters, large and small. He turned to her because of her wisdom and scholarship. We knew this of her too. We knew the First Lady of our synagogue to be unusually intelligent, dignified, wise, and, like everybody else has said, elegant. She was also beautiful. But to say that Malkah was beautiful is to say that her outer beauty matched her inner beauty, as the Torah suggests of our matriarch, Rebecca. I am glad that over time, beyond being an admirer from afar, I, like so many of you, was able to call her my friend. From the start, Malkah stepped out of the more traditional role of Rebbitzin to serve our temple in her own way, while helping the congregation adjust to the changing role of women, both in synagogue life and in society in general. Malkah created her own distinctive role as Rebbitzin, and in so doing became a role model to younger Rebbitzins. In that distinctive role, Malkah developed her intellectual and career interests, becoming a literary scholar, a beloved psychotherapist, and at the same time contributed to the temple's cultural vibrancy with her classes and book reviews. She was our modern-day Bruria, the brilliant wife of Rabbi Meir of Talmudic times. Malkah was devoted to her family, carefully setting boundaries to protect them from the rigors and scrutiny of public life. Far from allowing her family to live in a fishbowl, Malkah, a lover of flowers, created a forever garden in which each one of her beloved family, the rabbi, her children, and herself, was able to grow and flourish. In 2004, as we learned of the horrors of the genocide in Darfur, and at Rabbi Schulweis's urging, we started Jewish World Watch, an organization which has since become a major force in educating the public about ongoing genocides, in impacting national policy regarding those genocides, and in providing direct assistance to survivors. Rabbi Schulweis was engaged in all aspects of the growth and development of Jewish World Watch until he became too frail to do so. It was during the last several years of Rabbi Schulweis's life and subsequent to his 2014 death that I was able to really get to know Malkah Schulweis. She became Rabbi's substitute at JWW board meetings and would travel whatever distance was necessary to attend a meeting. She took her board-related obligations and fiduciary duties very seriously, carefully reviewing our board minutes and financials and requesting full reports from our field partners about the conditions in the various countries on Jewish World Watch's agenda and about our individual projects. She pored over data on our projects to be assured and sometimes to be convinced that our objectives were being met for each of the projects. She was beyond diligent as a board member. Her questions were posed and her probing was done in her unique and respected style with intelligence, elegance, and compassion. Between meetings, Malkah would sometimes call our staff or me to follow up on whatever matters were on her mind from previous board meetings. When she read an article relevant to the work of JWW in the New York Times, which I think Sylvia said she read religiously, she would call me to brainstorm more ways to raise awareness or to be more helpful in alleviating the suffering of those we were serving, be they in Syria, Bangladesh, Chad, Sudan, or Congo. Malkah's intelligent and soft way of suggesting a certain action was her strength. We paid attention to her as she would push us to do more and to be more. She was compelling, effective, and inspirational, perhaps because she was in equal parts intelligent, elegant, and kind. Malkah was a treasured and beloved board member, and she will be missed by our board. I will especially miss her. Malkah herself, also a poet, once wrote, quote, "We tend to get weary when there's a lot of worrisome news, and the weariness says, oh, not another genocide. And so we can be lured into tuning out what happens in other parts of the world. It is understandable to need to take a break from worry and concern," she said, "because it is a big problem to be worried and concerned all the time about the condition of human beings. But," she admonished, "the break must not be a long one," close quote. Malkah, like her perfect match, Rabbi Schulweis, as observed by so many, urged us to delve deeply into ourselves, to find the sacred meaning of life, to be decent, honorable, thinking human beings concerned with more than ourselves. Malkah Schulweis was a woman full of love and compassion. She invigorated traditions with a modern outlook and enriched all of our lives with her intellect and compassion. She deeply cherished and valued Torah, Jewish tradition, and our American democracy with all of her being. She deeply cared about pursuing justice and supporting those dedicated to that pursuit. The world is diminished by her absence. Like you, I am saddened by Malkah's death. But no doubt, like every person here and those watching, I was enriched by her life and feel extraordinarily blessed to have had the gift of her friendship and of her love. Her memory will surely be a forever blessing. Thank you.
I want to make sure anyone in the family has anything else they'd like to share. Okay. Before we conclude, just a word of gratitude. A word of gratitude to the Valley Beth Shalom staff for putting all this together. Thank God none of you saw this room 24 hours ago, but it didn't look this good. So a big thank you to Matt Weintraub, our executive director, to Morris Hunter, our technical director, and to Alana Vorspan, our communications director, for the streaming of this, to Orit Rappaport, to Rick Curiel and the staff for putting the room together, to Alana Zimmerman for putting all of this program together, and to everyone on the VBS staff for making this possible tonight. Thank you so very much for your sweetness in making this tribute so meaningful and so deep. A very big thank you to the leaders of VBS, the board members who served as ushers tonight. Jeff Goss, who's our president, is sitting quietly in the back, so I want to acknowledge Jeff. And there's many of you in the room who are former presidents of the synagogue, and that says a great deal about who we are. And I could go through the whole room and point out what everyone's relationship was to Malkah and how everyone was so very special to her. And that would be unfair to everyone I'd miss. But thank you all for being here and for sharing these wonderful moments. I do want to say one, though. I do want to say hello to Bert Libros, who was her personal physician and kept her alive and well for so many years. And There'd be so many nights when I would call and she'd say, hang on, Bert's here. The last doctor in the world who does house calls is sitting in the room, so thank you for your dedication and love to her. And to everyone who shared love and affection, support and respect with Malkah, thank you so very, very much. Just a last word before we conclude. Talmud tells a very famous tale about the Academy of Yavne in the 2nd century. The rabbis gathered to discuss a very minute piece of law. It had to do with an oven and whether the oven was usable or not. And Rabbi Eliezer stood up and said, this oven is completely usable, it is tahor, it should be used all the time. And the other rabbis disagreed. Now, Rabbi Eliezer was the Av Beit Din. He was the second in command of the community. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. And in every other case, his halacha was halacha. But in this case, the rabbis disagreed. And the oven was deemed unusable. The Talmud says that on that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought every imaginable argument to convince his colleagues, but they wouldn't buy it. They declared the oven tameh, treif, couldn't be used. And then Rabbi Eliezer got desperate. So passionate was he for his point of view, his interpretation, that he pointed to the courtyard and said, if I'm right, let that tree prove it. And the Talmud says the tree rocketed in the air. And the other rabbis looked and said, great miracle. But no tree can bring proof to a halachic debate. And Rabbi Eliezer misunderstood, and he said, well, you want a bigger miracle? And he points to the stream, and he says, if I'm right, let the stream of water prove it. And the stream flowed uphill. And the rabbi said, brilliant miracle. But proof cannot be brought from a stream. And then he got angry. Jewish families are like this, you know. Spite. He said, if I'm right, we're all going to die finding out. Let the walls of the academy prove it. And the walls began to fall in on top of the rabbis. Up jumped Rabbi Yoshua. He was a little tiny man with some sort of disability, but he rose and he points to the walls and he says, no. Scholars are debating halacha. You don't interfere. Tradition says the walls didn't fall down because Rabbi Joshua said to stop, but they didn't stand up because Rabbi Eliezer said they had to fall. And that's why every Jewish building never works right. And finally, Rabbi Eliezer, in his utter desperation to prove his interpretation, points toward heaven and said, if I'm right, let heaven prove it. And a voice from heaven came and said, he's right. In all matters of halacha, Rabbi Eliezer is right. Why do you argue with him? But then the astonishing thing happened. Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Yoshua stood up again. He pointed toward heaven and said, no, and quoted a verse of the Bible. In the 30th chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses says to his people, just before they're about to cross the river into the promised land, he says to his people, the Torah I have taught you is not too hard. It is not beyond you. It is in your heart. It is in your mind. It is in your mouth to do it. It's not in heaven that you should say someone should come get it for us. It's not beyond you, not beyond the sea that someone needs to get it. It's yours. You own it. Rabbi Joshua rose and said, Lo b'shamayim hi. Torah is not in heaven. You, God, gave us Torah and you gave us rationality and moral imagination. And you gave us the responsibility to make Torah alive in this world. Now let us do what you taught us to do. Rabbi Joshua said to God, back off. Butt out. So generations later, there was a rabbi who was a mystic, Rabbi Natan. And Rabbi Natan was having tea with Elijah the prophet. And he asked Elijah, what did God do at that moment? When a little rabbi said, buzz off. And he said, God laughed and said, Nitzchuni banai. My children have bested me. My children have defeated me. A God who is revealed to us in the moral courage of human beings, a God who is revealed to us in the moral imagination of human beings. That was the God that Harold Schulweis taught us. A God whose presence can be felt whenever we face a moral dilemma and find a way, find a courage to face it, find a way, find the energy and strength to face it and push back against the cruelty of the world. That's the God that Harold Schulweis taught us. But Malkah found another layer of meaning in that story, which is typical of Malkah. See, what she understood was that if Rabbi Eliezer had won the argument, then the debate would have stopped. Then the search for truth would have stopped. Then the process of interpretation would have stopped. And that would have been the tragedy. Malkah, on this bima 3 years ago this week, May 6, 2018, we honored her here. And I got to ask her 3 questions. And she answered one of my questions. She said, the cardinal truth of the Jewish tradition is becoming. Not being, but becoming. We're a tradition of verbs. We're a spiritual language of verbs, of dynamism. It's not what you know, it's the process of learning. It's not what you are, it's the process of growing. It's not what you've got, it's the process of sharing. It's not how old you are, it's the process of living. We are a people of becoming, and every human being is incomplete and needs to engage in a process of becoming. That's the great truth of Torah. We have a very peculiar name for God, we Jews. You know, you can't say it. Now think about that for a minute. What good is a name that you're not allowed to say? But there's a reason you're not allowed to say it. Because when Moses at the burning bush asked God, what am I going to tell him your name is? He simply said to them, Ehiyeh, I am becoming. That was the answer. It's not what I am, it's what I'm becoming. It's the direction in which I am growing. So we take the verbs for Haya, Hoveh, V'hiyeh, what was, is, and will be, and we create a name for God. God is the process of moving from past to present to future. That's God. That's the God of Malkah Schulweis. She said to us that night, the greatest thing about the Torah is that it's a story of a journey that doesn't have an end. We're always dreaming of a promised land that's out there somewhere, but we never get there. There is no promised land. The promised land is the journey itself. To engage in the journey, to recognize our collective and individual incompleteness, and to grow, to learn, to develop. To recognize our collective need and to share and to give and to care and to teach and to heal and to help. To recognize that we are always growing and to create an environment, an institution, a set of institutions which nurture that growing, which always encourage human beings to grow and to develop and to become. And tonight I just figured it out. Like you, I just figured it out. I figured out what the punchline was. I figured out the line that she didn't teach us, but now she just taught it to me. Because if life isn't being but becoming, it doesn't end. You just pass on the becoming to the next generation. You pass it on to friends and students and teachers. You pass it on to children and children's children. You pass it on in a community. God isn't being, but becoming. And what is most sacred in life is the process of becoming. If there is no promised land, but only the reaching toward it, then there really is no end. When we become, when we grow, when we learn, when we teach and we share and we give and we help and we heal and we care, and we participate in the life of God, and that is immortality. And that is her immortality. Zecher Tzadeket Livracha. May her memory always bless us with her wisdom. Would you please stand and join me in Kaddish? Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemeh Rabbah. V'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'galau v'zman kariv yimru amen. Yehesh me Rabba mevarach le'olam al maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemei dekudsha brichu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata. Damiron be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Uyaseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael v'yamru. Oseh shalom b'mromav uyaseh shalom aleinu. May the source of peace in all the world bless this family and this circle of friends with peace. And the memories, the wisdom, the legacy that Malkah has left us. In the embrace we share with each other, which had brought her such joy. And in the promise of tomorrows that are still yet to come. May the God who has carried us on all the journeys of our generations carry you now, from death back to life, and from sadness back to joy. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to all who joined us online on YouTube and on Facebook for joining us tonight. The Schulweis family is here if you'd like to come and say a word. Just be very brief because we want to make sure everyone stays healthy and goes home healthy and safe. Thank you for being with us. Good night.
9:30 tomorrow.
Oh, that's right.
I'm gonna run the meeting at the same time.
I thought we were going to do a video instead.
Yeah. I'll see you.
That's what we thought.
I'll see you in person.
Video at 9:30? Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Okay.
It's on my calendar. I said,
Yes, sir.
send the
Okay.
email. Dark hair.
Dark pants, white shirt? White shirt. Okay. Wonderful.